Good morning,
Manana, thanks for
Safura.
joining. Oh, hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Not well. How are you?
Good, good.
Morning.
I just wanted to introduce you to Larato Zigalala and Umunyana Rugege, both of whom have very generously agreed to share their time with us this morning to talk about human rights and health. This is
Oh,
Elizabeth. Elizabeth runs the mentorship program.
hi, Lorato.
Hi,
Hi.
Elizabeth. How are you?
Good. How are you?
No, I'm good. Sorry, let me just turn on my camera. There you go.
Good morning.
I'm actually in the doctor's office, so
Oh, shame.
hence my my camera is off. So I'm just gonna show my face and switch it off again.
Okay. Hope you're okay.
No, I'm not. I actually have a sore gum, so hence I decided to come to the doctor
Oh,
today.
sorry.
Oh no. Okay, because I thought you had told me that you were not going to be joining today. I don't know why I had that in my head.
Yeah, no. I'm not going to join for a couple of minutes until my appointment is over, and then I'll rejoin later.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi,
Um,
Rukeke.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm trying, thank you.
Yeah, shame. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. Okay, so others are still joining in. I think we can start at 10 05. I think, is that okay?
yeah, I was going to ask you how long do people usually take to join? This is actually, I should say, Lorato and Omanyana, because I've been in the US, I haven't been
Hmm.
able to join these meetings
Mhm.
because they've been at an unreasonable time. So this is actually my first time joining one of the meetings.
That is
Um,
true. That is true. So we're gonna join. We're gonna give it another 2 minutes, and then you guys can start at 10:05.
Okay.
Great.
All
Okay, cool. And
right.
don't worry, I've got it in hand. I'll chair the session.
Okay. Thank you.
And okay, great.
Okay. Bye, guys. For now.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Think we can start. It's 5 past. And Lorato and Umanyana, if you're up to it, put your cameras on. Otherwise, it's fine if your signals are not great. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce both of you to the mentorship group. Just to tell you a little bit about the mentorship program. This mentorship program is run by Elizabeth Moshashana. She just decided to do this. It's not like part of an official organization. She just woke up one morning and decided that she was going to start a mentorship program, which I think is brilliant. And there are about 65 mentees, varying from law students all the way to article clerks. And so they're all looking at different types of careers and different pathways in law. This is the fifth session of the year. Each session has been about a different topic. There was one on pupillage, there was one on sort of compliance and risk management. There was one on family law. This session is really about building a practice either in health or in human rights law. And so I think it should be no surprise as to why I chose both of you, given that you both have incredible practices in human rights and in health. I wanted to quickly give a brief overview of your bios, and then what we're going to do is have a kind of 30 to 40-minute discussion where I'll ask you both some questions about how you built your careers, and then I'll open it up to the mentees to ask questions. Mentees, you can also put your questions in the chat, and I'll put them to Lorato and Umanyana. So I'll start with Umanyana's biography. Umanyana, in case you cannot tell from her background, works at UNAIDS, which is a joint program between several different agencies of the United Nations that are aimed towards sort of eradicating HIV. She works on human rights. She's in fact the head of human rights at UNAIDS. And prior to that, she was the executive director of an NGO called Section 27, whom some of you may know. They were involved in the Michael Kumape case. They were involved in the textbooks case in Limpopo, and they're also involved in the Life Isitimeni tragedy. She holds a BA in environmental studies from the state of New York, State University of New York, apologies, a master's degree from Cornell, and an LLB from good old UCT. She also clerked at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So that is Umanyana. You can see she's had an absolutely incredible career in both health and human rights. And then Lorato is somebody who holds a very special status in my life. I met Lorato when I was an article clerk at Bowman Gilfillan. At that point, she had already gotten a master's from Notre Dame University in the US, and she had clerked for Justice Froneman. Is that right? Yeah. And after she was a senior associate at Bowman's, she was in the insurance litigation practice, but she was also doing work in public procurement. One of her clients at the time was the public protector, who was Tuli Madonsela. And she left Bowman's to take up practice at the bar. And she's been working on issues that are related to public law, commercial law, environmental law at the bar at a group called 621. And I actually did my pupillage with her now 2 years ago. And some of you may know her because she is also a very active participant in South Africa's case in the ICJ against for Palestine, concerning the genocide that Israel is committing against Gazans. So you can see that these are both complete powerhouse women who have really taken the law and used it to materially impact how people live their lives, which is what I think we should all be aiming to do. And so they're both personal inspirations for me. And I hope that you guys are ready to ask some really hard questions and take some deep inspiration from their journeys. So if you don't mind, I'll start with Umanyana first. Did you know that you wanted to end up at an organization like UNAIDS? I think a lot of our mentees are very interested in studying abroad, working in international organizations. So is this something that you were kind of building your career towards, or is it something that kind of organically happened as you developed your expertise and reputation within the field?
Yeah, thanks so much, Safura, and thanks everybody for the invitation to join you this morning. Yeah, it was much more organic. As you say, I didn't have a plan with that, I've never had a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan. So I never started out thinking that I wanted to work for the UN. I just have been driven in many ways by my passion to have an impact in the world and to use whatever I can, whatever tools I have, whatever intellect I have, to make that difference in the world. And my career has been about that. And so that's been the driving force, more so than looking at specific jobs or specific organizations that I wanted to work for, although I've always been very much aware of the international system. and aware as well of the international human rights system. I was always familiar with the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But I didn't necessarily know that that is where I wanted to end up in the UN doing this work. So I think it's important for me to not think about job roles, but rather to think about how to drive your passion and to continue to be motivated to do what you're doing. So that's really it for me, and it's really been very much an organic journey. Thanks.
So, Lorato, I'm curious, did you always know that you wanted to end up at the bar and eventually be arguing in the ICJ? Or was it similarly an organic and opportunistic journey for you?
Thanks, friend. Thanks to everybody. I'm very, very excited just to be able to talk to people about my journey a little bit. For me, I think I agree with Munyana that it is an organic experience. I think at the end of the day, I think I've always wanted to be a litigator. That's the one thing. I knew that I wanted to be able to run cases. I wanted to be able to be in court. But my first thoughts were not necessarily to be at the bar, because the bar is quite intimidating, and though many people view lawyers as public speakers, there's a lot of people who do law but don't view themselves as public speakers, right? And so for that purpose, I think many people then don't consider themselves as people who would necessarily be at the bar. So I started my journey doing articles. I did articles, and I from then on I went to the Concord, and I think it was in that experience that I really began to think to myself that I wanted to be able to use the law in ways that you can affect people's rights in many ways, be able to advance their cases and so on. And it was shortly after that process of having been at the bar that, not at the bar, sorry, at the Concord, that I started to think very seriously about going to the bar. And it took me maybe about 4 or 5 years to do that, because again, I just didn't believe myself to have that kind of personality. But in realizing and meeting different advocates, I think I realized that there are very different types of advocates, and they're very different types of personalities. And that gave me a lot of comfort in making the transition to go to the bar. And it was in that experience, going to the bar, look, you work on the cases that are given to you, but certain kinds of work also gravitate towards you. And I found myself doing I do a lot of commercial work, I do a lot of other work, but I have a significant, I would say, human rights practice, and a significant amount of work that is very varied. And when one considers the fact that things that affect rights often interlink, when you think in South Africa, rights violations don't happen only in public law settings. They happen in instances where you have a cross section of rights. Private sector actors will affect rights, and so on. And so the ability to be able to kind of be fluid and be able to work through commercial law and contractual issues in the same way you can talk about human rights and constitutional issues, gives you an ability to be in a lot of spaces and to be able to be involved in a lot of cases. And so maybe the one thing in talking about, let's say, human rights or health or anything like that, the health in particular, is being able to understand it within not only just by itself, but as it is impacted and affected by various other components. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm learning things about you that I didn't know. So, Umanyana, I would like to just rewind a little bit and talk about your journey into becoming a health lawyer, if I can put it that way. Obviously, you started with a degree in environmental sciences. How did you decide to pursue health? And I think, secondly, a lot of people, when they think about health law, they think about things like medical malpractice, as
Mm,
opposed to the kinds of things you do.
mm,
Can you just speak to us a little bit about that kind of journey? How do you go from doing your law degree into doing this kind of work?
mm. Yeah, thanks. And I think, when I was growing up, I did not see the examples of human rights lawyers. So that wasn't the foremost thing for me. When you're trying to think about what you want to study, you're still a teenager, right? And my thinking was, well, I want to make a difference in the world. And, with the history of my high school experience, it seemed to me to be the thing, right? Because there was a big movement at the time about environmental justice. And, there was a shift from just looking at green issues, save the fill in the blank, right? And there was more a focus on how the environment impacts on poor people in particular, and how corporations destroy environments and that impact on people's ability to have a livelihood, and be healthy in their environment. There were a lot of stories about communities getting sick because of the environment that they were in. So that was my initial foray. That was my first degree, and I loved it. I really loved it, and I did my first internship in a human rights organization that was working on environmental justice. It was also working on health issues and safety issues and education, the right to education. So I really got an exposure at that time, just finishing off my first degree and having an opportunity to do this internship. And I later worked for the organization for a period of time. And I really loved the combination of young people because there was a real focus in that organization. It's the Public Interest Research Group in New York. Most states in the US have a similar type of organization. Um, Obama is famously known to have been one of those youngsters in that organization that grows up, doing social justice work in communities and understanding, utilizing your first degree, your little knowledge that you have about the world to really serve. And so I then could see how the combination of that type of research and advocacy, but also law, and I had not yet seen that working. And, I was one of the young people who was, organizing, trips to lawmakers and writing up stories of people who were impacted by environmental justice issues. And then I started looking at the next stage of that work, which was the legal stuff, right? Because you need to build up those cases, you need to build up community advocacy and community capacity to articulate the issues, and the peer learning that happens at that level, and getting into the media and being able to tell the stories. And so, the work that I did then actually impacted on some of the lawmaking. So, we were working on certain environmental laws, and other types of laws. So that really was my introduction to what we call social justice work now, right? And so that's when I decided that I really wanted to study law, and to do this type of work that impacts people. And I was in a multi-issue organization, right? So it was all the issues. And that really was beneficial. And, later on, I led an organization, working on the right to health and the right to education. But part of the criticism that came from, the activist community in South Africa saying, you can't just work on one issue. You can't just work on two issues. You have to be a multi-issue organization. You have to be able to learn from different movements and bring movements together. So that was my first experience, and that's how I really got to see how these different issues work together. Because, we always say rights are intersectional and indivisible, and dependent on each other. And so for me, it really is about where you see your passion, and how you can build your skill set around a range of issues that really impact on people's lives.
One thing that really strikes me about your answer, which I think is so great, is the idea that everything is incremental, everything builds on everything else. And I think the other thing that you've highlighted quite nicely is I think when we have an underlying value that drives our work, such as social justice or the want to change people's lives, you keep making decisions and it leads you in particular directions. So it's okay that you may not have everything mapped out, but if you're making your decisions consistently, it'll take you in the right direction eventually. So I think that's incredibly helpful advice. Lorata, I want to ask you a slightly different question, which is you've done so many different things after your law degree. What was for you the most formative legal experience that you had following getting your degree?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, the most formative legal experience that probably changed my view and outlook was being at the Constitutional Court for that year. Because, when you're at the Constitutional Court, you're in probably the most unique place ever. Very early in your legal career, do you get to be involved with judges who are making the decisions at the highest level. And, in law, we are trained to apply what the law is at the moment and to see how we can incrementally affect it and so on. When you're at the Constitutional Court, you are in this unique place where you get to think about what the law ought to be. It's not only what the law is, but what the law ought to be. And you have this ability to be able to influence quite early in your career and make really kind of, you don't make the decisions, the judges make the decisions, but to be involved in that process is quite something, and so that had a significant view in my growth, because it taught me this. You come out of law school and you think you know things, you think you understand, and so on. But I remember having a conversation with Justice Cameron, and he said, and we were talking about what to do and all of that, and he said, no, you know what you do after the Concord is you go and you spend some of the quiet times learning the law, learning how to practice it, learning how to implement it, learning it, and he said you need to go back, go back and begin with the difficulties of being able to formulate relief on behalf of a client for for issues that no one's litigated about. How do you structure that? How do you structure a case? How do you all of that? And all of that is kind of small things that you learn as you refine. And so being at that very big stage of the Constitutional Court and being a researcher there, I think it really was also a deep kind of humbling experience, because it said, and with this discussion with Justice Cameron, was that, okay, now you've got to start doing the small work, the building up your understanding, building up yourself as a litigator or whatever you are. I'm speaking from this perspective because I'm a litigator. So yeah, that for me was definitely the most formative experience.
I mean, I wish I had formative experiences that involved casual conversations with Justice Cameron. But no, I think what I'm getting from it, which I think is very, very important, is I think a lot of us think that we're going to do this one big thing, like we're going to do our masters overseas, or we're going to clerk at the Constitutional Court, or we're going to do articles at a big five firm, and we're going to pop out of that experience a ready-made lawyer that's going to be a superstar. And I think that brings so much perspective to the idea that, again, and it speaks to something that Umanyana was talking about, that all these things are incremental. You do something and it drives you in a particular direction, but you have to keep doing the hard graft. There's kind of no shortcut around it. I want to ask you one more question about the Concord, and then I'll switch back to Umanyana. But I know a lot of the mentees want to apply and they want to clerk. Do you have any advice for them about how to get in?
Yeah, I mean, other than do it, apply and try to get in. That's the one thing. The second thing is that it is a heavily sought after position. So if you don't get in, it is it is something you need to try and do again. And try again. And when I was in my year, there was a guy, Mduduza, and he's now with me at the Concord. He had applied 4 times. And on the 4th time, he got in. So as people, I think we often have strange relationship with like failure, like, oh, I didn't get it this one time, it must mean that I'm not chosen or whatever. And it may not be that one time that you applied was your season, but if this is something that you want to seek out to do, I certainly think not only to apply, but to apply again. And and keep trying, and do that. So yeah, that is definitely my advice. Yeah.
I can attest that I applied 4 times and I got in on the 4th go around. So it is not a rarity. I was not even the person I know who's applied the most. The person I know who's applied the most applied 5 times and got in the 5th time. So sometimes I think they get so tired of seeing our application, they just let us in eventually, I hope. But anyway, now to just switch back to Umanyana, you did a very interesting clerkship, and I'm curious about how you did it, how the experience was, and whether you would recommend it.
Yes, yes. I do recommend it. It is a formative experience. If you have the opportunity to do something like that early in your career, it's pretty phenomenal. I worked at the International Criminal Court just after I finished articles. So I actually left even before getting admitted and had to come back, get admitted, and write it in my affidavit that I left, and then I came back. So take the opportunity, just apply everywhere. You get to work with the most amazing human beings that you will meet in your career, because these places really are about excellence. And you get to see how to practice excellence, how to learn from people who know so much, but also are learning all the time too. And you get to see that kind of learning mentality that lawyers must have, because things are always evolving and we have to get on top of every issue, get on top of your issues, learn new issues. Think about the competition law. This is new to South Africa, but we have seasoned experts now because they took that opportunity to learn about a new area of law, to build expertise, to go and appear in the tribunal, work in the commission. And so now it's like, it's always been there, right? So I think having that opportunity and just applying, I mean, I got in the first time that I applied, but that is about timing, right? I think a lot of the way our careers happen is about a bit of luck and a bit of timing, but also tenacity, right? And just saying, look, I'm going to do this, I'm going to try. I didn't have a source of income, so I went to Weber Wenzel, where I was doing my articles, and said, I need to take time off. I want to do this thing, and they actually helped me out financially. They helped me to supplement the small stipend that I was getting at the ICC, because I had I had bills to pay in Joburg. So so you don't even know until you try and you ask and you find that actually people are there to support you. And just being your authentic self all the time, people will be like, yes, this is a person who is committed to the what they want to do, committed to the organization, and it's worth taking the risk on this person. Because indeed, you are taking a risk by going off and doing something like this. You're taking a risk. It's kind of a sidestep where you take time off of practice or study or whatever to do this thing. So I think it's so worth it. I worked for the Ghanaian judge at the ICC at the time. I knew very little about the court. I had to learn about the court. There were different chambers. I was put into the pre-trial chamber, where the investigations happen and a preliminary court hearing happens in order to decide whether the trial will move forward. So I got to see both the pre-trial stage where I was working with the judge and her team, but I also got to see what was happening in the trial section. And so you get to see international human rights law in action. And you get to see, why do people criticize this institution? And you also start to think critically, but productively about where you are. And you're going to have to do that. You'll be in an organization, you'll be there for 5 years, and you're like, well, is it time to move on? Is it not time to move on? Should I not be promoted? And, you have to think productively about your own space and your own career and your own path, and choose to be your authentic self every single time. That's my advice. That's held for me throughout, from studying to doing all these different things, to my leadership journey, leading an organization, to my work now in the UN. I'm a different kind of person in the UN, and it turns out that the organization needs a different kind of person right now in this moment. So that's where I would suggest you do it. I think it's really a phenomenal experience. I'm sure now with the ICJ, South Africa's intervention, they will look more at applications from South Africans. Go for it. Just think, what else can I do? Where are the opportunities? And go for it.
No, I think that's so I think one thing that both you and Loretta have spoken about is the fact that you get to kind of see behind the curtain, and it kind of really switches your thinking from seeing law as how it is on a piece of paper and how you apply it into seeing its potential and how it should move forward, which I think particularly when you're leading an organization like Section 27, thinking about what should be improved, those skills just seem like absolutely integral to like what the work of a human rights lawyer should be. I want to ask you something kind of not so optimistic, I guess, which is about your comment about being your authentic self. I think that, and I say this a little bit from my personal experience as well, but also I would imagine it's a fear for many of the mentees. I think being a person of color, being a woman, being young, it's very challenging in these spaces that are quite traditionally not looking like you and not geared towards people like you. It's really challenging to be your authentic self. I think it's very challenging to become comfortable, but I also think it's really challenging to find people who are willing to accept you for who you are. And so I'll ask both of you this question, but Omanyana, if you could start, like, how do you navigate that part of your identity within these spaces that are really traditionally not geared for people like us?
The entire profession is still dominated by white men, right? You look at every area, you look at the corporate law firms, you look at the bar, and especially before I actually came into lead Section 27, even in the public interest sector, right? And there was a big shift at that time, from white leadership that had been there for a long time. I took over from a founder who had been in that organization for about, 18 years or something, almost 20 years. And so those were the people who had been trusted and who had been seen as legitimate leaders in that space. And then in comes young Black woman, and I kind of in a way decided without thinking about it to be my authentic self. But I just came in at a time where it was a transitional phase, and I did not even apply for the job to begin with. I applied it the second time they advertised for the job because I wasn't trying to get into executive leadership at the time. And partly it was, well, surely there's somebody else, right? It turns out there isn't, and that it is your time to step into that void and bring yourself. And it turns out you are the right person in that moment. And so I think it's kind of counterintuitive, but it means that you have to be who you are and who you've come up to be through your various experiences in that moment. Now I can tell you that the donors, and donors are important stakeholders in this space, they, some of them were very supportive, some of them weren't. Different stakeholders, some of them were extremely supportive. Some people came up to me who I didn't even know they knew who I was, right? And they came to me and said, let's have a private conversation about how we support you. So being yourself is actually incredibly important because you're impacting on people that you don't even know about. You are part of a change and a shift in that moment that you will never fully realize until you look backwards and say, yes, that was the right thing. I did the right thing. I made the right decisions. My judgment was sound. And it goes back to why you're doing what you do, because you're driven by the passion for justice, social justice, solidarity. You're driven by the ethics of the space that we're in as lawyers. We're driven by rules and by ethical rules. So those are all things that you suddenly realize you're wearing quite tightly all the time. And so, yes, it's a battle. Yes, you must fight. But I think that if you do so in a way that is inauthentic, it comes through. And you will lose support. And the support that you have is really incredibly important. For me, my board was incredibly supportive at the time. Some of them weren't, and they left. And we got in new board members, Black women, onto the board, young people onto the board, shifted the organization, I think, in the right direction. And so you look back on these things and you realize that actually, if you had tried to be the white man, if you had tried to be, more like something you had seen or more like what you think is expected, then you will fall flat. And, part of what you do in these leadership positions is to be able to tell a story, to enable your colleagues to get the work done, to tell the story to raise money, to tell the story to open doors, to get into government offices, to, change laws or support government to do a certain thing. And that storytelling, if it rings untrue, it comes through every time. And so that means you have to know your subject matter. You have to be authentic. You have to be prepared all the time. As lawyers, we know our job is to be prepared. And that is a rule throughout your career, I promise you. So I think, yeah, it's really hard, but we're not in this to do things that are easy. We do things that are hard. We do hard things because they're worth it.
I mean, I like that you kind of snuck in the preparation there because I do think that's kind of foundational. If you're not a good lawyer and you're not good at your job, that's kind of you're starting from a losing position. But I think it's incredibly brave to hear you talk about taking up this position and choosing to be authentic. But you also kind of gestured at something which I actually have been talking a lot about in academia, which is the creation of communities of care, surrounding yourself by people, with people who are going to be supportive, not slavishly supportive, not just kind of coddling you and being yes men, but genuinely offering you the kind of support you need. And so I can very slyly hand it off to Lorato to put the same question to her, because I will just say Lorato is a fundamental part of my community of care and has created a community of care for many women at the bar. So I don't know, Lorato, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the barriers you've experienced or some of the challenges you've experienced being a person of color, whether at the bar or kind of throughout your career.
Sure. Thanks, Zephs. So I view it there's two things. The first one is self, coming from the position of a Black woman. We often, I'm speaking from my own perspective, is that you often have to overcome your own sense of lack of confidence in yourself and your own sense of feeling that you need to qualify yourself in spaces. And when you are given a promotion or so on, to having a big sense of a kind of imposter syndrome about being there. And so two things have been very important to me in my growth was quite early on. I had a talk in the middle of this week at Rhodes, and I was talking to a few law students and politics students, and one of them asked me, how do you just get the courage? And I said to him, you stop looking for other people to tell you you're so smart, you must do this. Because you have to make the decision that I am so smart, I'm going to do this. And you have to know that as an intrinsic sense of yourself. And it's important because for as long as you're waiting for these cheerleading masses to keep telling you, you're so amazing, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, you won't get it. People tend to cheer afterwards. They cheer after you've done the thing, but they don't cheer before. And if you're waiting for people to say, you're so brilliant, you should go to the Constitutional Court, then you won't do it. You must decide in yourself now. It's a decision. It's not an end of a process that you are good, you are there, you are enough. And so I tell people a lot that I would wake up every single day when I was an associate, and I would say to myself, and I am good at law. And it's such a strange sentence to say, but I would say it so often for so long, it literally became me. I am good at law. And one of the big things about it was that when something would happen, is part of our journey, and maybe this is my second point, there's no success without failure. You don't get to become Serena without losing a few matches. And if you're terrified to fail, you don't become Serena. And you don't go out there, So being reconciled with yourself, that you are good even when you fail, is important. It's critical because nobody succeeds at a big level without also having to go through the process of failure. And so you need to change how you view what failure is and what failure does in law, particularly because what I do is adversarial, right? It's adversarial. So you write something, somebody writes back and says, what you wrote was nonsense and you're going to lose your case. And if you take your sense of worth from whether you win or lose your cases, you have to win or lose your cases or else, but if you take your sense of worth from it, you are going to, you're going to struggle. So reconciling yourself they're part of your journey. If you want to succeed in a big way, the way Umenyana did in applying for a big job, standing on a big stage, is reconciling yourself with the idea that you may fail as well in that process. So in the sense of how do you deal with the bar, one of the things I've struggled with very early on was this idea at the bar there weren't so many Black women and not so many Black women that would be briefed on big matters. And you had this feeling that, like, if I mess up on this matter, I'm messing up for all Black women. And so there would be times where I'd be dead terrified to express a point of view, to say something, to write something, because I'm speaking for all the Black people. If I fail here, I'm going to fail for everybody. And so part of my journey was firstly learning to take myself out of that type of thinking, that other people's flawed thinking, they have grace and they have room for themselves to fail in spaces, but they don't have grace and room for you as a Black woman to fail, because when you fail, you're failing for the race, right? But they have endless grace for white men to fail. And realizing, and I think this is powerfully part of building a community of care, is surrounding yourself with people who will ensure that you have the right perspective about things, ensure that you have the right perspective about not making your failures too big and making your successes too small, which is a problem that we have. You know, when you succeed, you're like, anybody could have done that. And when you fail, you're the biggest failure in the world, you know? And having people who shape your perspective and shape that. So to round out, I would say it's three things. It's one, reconciling and dealing with the conversation you have with yourself. Two, understanding that failing and succeeding is part of life. Nobody's on the up and up. You go up and down and up and down. Look at, I was watching the soccer now, Kylian Mbappe is everybody is amazing. He's whatever, but he loses matches, whatever, and they learn from that experience. And somehow that's something that we have to reconcile with ourselves, that life is like that. And so we take chances, we succeed at them, take chances. Sometimes they fail. So failure is part of life. And three, really surrounding yourself with people who will constantly make sure you have the right perspective about what is your obligations. I have to win my cases. I have to be the most prepared. I have to be this. But what is also not your responsibility? I'm not carrying all of Black women, and I'm not carrying all of whatever. That's not my responsibility. It's not my responsibility to be fighting that fight, because people have flawed perspectives. Those I would say would possibly be my 3 points.
I think those are super important pieces of advice, and definitely things that I think I have in different ways also imbued. I'm really glad that you mentioned Serena Williams, because I watched King Richard a couple weeks ago and I was just struck by the kind of role he played as a mentor and a protector. And I was thinking a lot about, this is a mentorship program and all the mentees here have been allocated mentors, but I think more broadly, I think young people experience a lot of challenges trying to find mentors, but more importantly, building relationships with mentors, knowing what they can go to mentors for, what they should go to mentors for, and what they shouldn't. So can I ask you, Lerato, and then secondly, Umanyana, do you have any advice about building a good mentorship relationship with someone, like be it like how you approach someone, how you identify a good mentor, or what you ask them for, anything like that?
Sure. I mean, Seth, I don't know. These things are very personal in the sense that it's the person that you are relating to. I think the first thing is lots of people are attracted to, kind of people with the high level, big titles, so on, right? But it's also good to identify the person who's at the next step that you would like to be at. Because that person can help you navigate something, like me wanting to be mentored by the CEO of, I don't know, something. They may be so busy and so far from where I need to be that that they can't meaningfully impact my life. One of the things about pupillage, which I think is really powerful, is that when you go through the bar and you do pupillage, they pair you with a mentor who's a junior themselves. You're not allowed to get a mentor who's a silk. And the main reason for that is that where you're going to learn where you need to be in the next 4 or 5 years is the person who's 4 or 5 years ahead of you, right? So of course everybody wants to be mentored by Vim Trengove if they're given the chance, but Vim's got 40 years on you. So, that's the one thing, is identifying that a person who's just not so far away from where you are, but has those characteristics that you believe that that could help. And then I think it depends on personalities as to what you can bring to them. So I can't speak very much to that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I will say you've picked up on something which my dad had to explain to me about 3 different times before I got it. He said there are people who are role models and there are people who are mentors. Role models are like the people who are super successful, who you aspire to be like. The mentor is someone much closer to you who will help you along a path. And I think the other thing he told me, which I found to be true, is it's okay to outgrow mentors or to have your relationship with mentors evolve. So you can have someone who feels like a mentor when you're in law school, but feels like a peer as soon as you've graduated, or somebody who is this giant when you meet them, but 3 years later you've surpassed them. And that is just part and parcel of it's not a static relationship, it's actually very
Right.
dynamic.
Very much so.
So, Omanyana, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. And yes, your dad's right. There is that big distinction, and I see it as mentors and allies, and both are really critical in your journey. And I agree, mentors should be people who are closer to your experience. And I see those less formally than maybe some of you because you're in a mentorship program. I've never been in any kind of formal mentorship program like this one. But I think that the basis of a good mentoring relationship is the friendship, it's the normal relationships that you build with friends and peers and people in your profession who can help you. My circle of friends from law school, we still talk to each other and we still advise each other and we still are growing together. So I think for me, not having had that specific experience, I wouldn't want to comment on, but I would say that I've learned a lot from my peers. And I think that what you have to have in your mind as well is to just have a learning attitude. At every stage, we are learning new things all the time. And no, the people who you look to and you think they know everything, they too are learning. So, and they will help you learn, right? And you have to find those people who are generous with their time and who are willing to just, have a chat with you. And, trying to coerce somebody into a relationship that doesn't quite fit is not going to help you, right? Making a formal thing out of what could just be like, oh, we run into each other and we have a conversation, or I can WhatsApp somebody and say, I'm having this, issue. Do you have any advice? And to then, have that generosity of that, like, oh, of course I do. And here's my advice. Allies are incredibly important. So some of you will be going to do articles, or go to the bar, or go into different types of organizations. And for me, it is, it is about being your authentic self, but it's also about seeking out people who you admire, and who you see as somebody who could help you in the future. And building those relationships, which will be different kinds of relationships, right? And, for me, what they'll see first and foremost is your work, which is why we keep coming back to excellence and preparation. You've got to be substantive. You can't just play the politics, which I've seen a lot, right? See people who are not substantive, but boy, they can tell a good story in a room, right? And you can see those people rising, because they know how to play the system and work the system. And that's great. And, some people that works for them. But I imagine that people who are on this call today, will be the people who are of substance and who are excellent. And that will be the opening for you to be admired by other people and to say, yes, let's give this person a chance. And, you might even find, if you need some kind of introduction or reference, those are the allies that you need, right? And so, in offering them something like an analysis, this is what I think, I want to share something with you. So it goes both ways. It's not just about you gaining some knowledge or insight, it's also about you sharing. And that's the balance of relationship that I think you should seek. And just think of it as a relationship. So don't put too much pressure on it or on yourself or on the other person. Thanks.
It's a relationship is a very good way to describe it, because I also think with mentorship programs like this, for example, it's kind of a lucky packet who you're paired with. And the reality is organic mentorship relationships don't just bloom. You have to keep trying to find that right match, that right, you almost like speed dating. You've got to keep trying to find somebody that you're going to click with. So I'm just mindful of the time. I don't want to take up like a whole 2 hours of your time. But what I will do is maybe just offer the next 15 minutes if there are any questions from any of the mentees. I saw there was one which basically asked about key skills that are essential for a successful career in human rights and how to develop these skills. I think you both did touch on this, but I don't know if you would like to maybe elaborate in a couple points or sentences about this question. Maybe I think offering, you both spoke a lot about how your experiences gave you these skills, but let's say somebody couldn't get into the Constitutional Court or couldn't go to The Hague, what can they do right now to set them on the right path, themselves on the right path?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes, thanks for that question. And I think the hard skills are important. So I would say, when you study, you're reading a lot and you're writing a lot of papers, and it's a bit of a drag. And when you start working, you then have, that work that you're engaged in. But I think as well, continuing to read and be engaged with the world is incredibly important, because law cannot exist outside of what is happening in the world, what democratic processes are happening. We've just had an election. We have a coalition government for the first time. Understanding that stuff is important. Being able to have conversations with people about what is happening in the world, the key things. We have a US election coming up. It matters. We're seeing in Europe more right-wing governments. That is important to watch and understand. And in the UK, we've seen that we had a conservative government for over a decade, and now that is shifting to a different kind of government. And what does that mean for the world? What does that mean for us? These things are all important. We're talking about healthcare. We know that every time a Republican is in the White House in the US, this impacts on access to health services, to reproductive health services. It impacts on the kinds of laws that are passed in countries. It impacts on minorities and minority rights. We've seen a big backlash against LGBT communities in Africa in particular, and that is influenced by the politics in the US. So ensuring that you're up to speed, also reading is really important. Also, writing is such a critical skill. Being a good writer, it makes all the difference in your life as a lawyer. And in order to write well, you have to read. So I only started wearing glasses after I was in law school. I managed to get through 2 degrees without glasses, and then law school happened, and I'm wearing big chunky Coke bottles here. But it's because that is the nature of what we do, right? And so continuing to sharpen those skills, the communication skills, the storytelling skills, like I said, you find that being able to tell a good story gets you very far in this space. Human rights is not something that's intuitive to people. It's very unlike the corporate space. It's not well understood. So you have to be able to tell people about complex issues about international systems and what the Constitution actually says about land reform in a way that really connects with people. And understanding your audience, also incredibly important, because if you're talking to government officials, it is going to be a very different story that you tell compared to civil society organizations. If you're in a diplomatic space like I am now, these are new skills that I'm learning. I'm learning how to tell stories in a diplomatic space, how to tell a story in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, where we just had a resolution pass on HIV and human rights. And why did we get what we got in there? Because we told the story about why it's so important to retain language on key populations. And even if there's cultural differences about gay people and other sexual minorities, we need to understand who's most impacted by the HIV epidemic. And so I'm learning to tell those different stories, learning to be in a space with diplomats who represent countries, right? So there's one person, who's sitting in Geneva, the ambassador. They are the person you need to persuade. And so these are really concrete skills that you have to think about and continuously learn and shape. But again, for me, it's always having that learning mindset where you're always willing to be wrong and to be able to disagree with people, but also have something to back it up. So it's always being substantive, always being prepared, and always being excellent in what you do. So those are, it's about the hard skills, but very much about everything else, because law is about life. It's not about rule books. It's about how you can change the world with all these different tools that you have.
Super easy to do that, by the way. Just wake up, roll out of bed, be excellent all the time. No, I think it is important. None of this is easy, I think, is the underlying point, right? Lorado, do you want to add anything or share anything?
Out of habit, I always switch off my microphone because, as Safs knows, I've got 2 small children. And so I am constantly like on the defense against somebody like possibly running into my room. So that's, no, I think that the answer is absolutely spot on. Law is about being able to read, write, and speak. And so you need to be able to shape that, your ability to read critically, write well, and speak clearly. It's a learning process, but the more you can do it, the more you practice it, the better you get at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was a journalist at Ground Up for a little while. I used to write short articles about cases, and I didn't realize in doing that I was doing something that I never did as a law student, which is I was reading court papers. And I spent 18 months just reading court papers in some of the most interesting cases that were being brought in South Africa. And then I had to take these hundreds of pages long court papers and transcribe them into like a 700-word article. And my instruction was make it simple enough that somebody with a matric will understand it. And I think there has not been a thing that I've done since then or before then that made a bigger difference in my ability to write and read as a lawyer than that experience. It's quite random. A lot of people are like, why did you do this? And I can't say why, but what I can say is I highly recommend it to anybody who's looking to improve their skills. Even if you just do it for yourself, I think it's so important to begin engaging with the practice of law, even as a law student, or even while you're looking for articles. We don't read court papers ever. We read judgments. But how do you get to that judgment is the court papers. I'm just going to open it up. People have been reacting with hearts and laughing faces, so I sense there are mentees there. Does anybody want to unmute and ask a question in like the next 5 minutes? I think after that, I'm going to release our very willing guest. Oh, we have somebody immediately. Timber, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I have a lot of questions. I don't even know where to start. I don't know why I'm so interested in pretty much every other law field, in particular medical law and human rights, right? So, one of the questions that I have on me right now, I wrote them down, is that are there any other academic courses or programs that are most beneficial for a career in human rights and medical law? Having said that, how has obtaining a foreign degree or a certificate contributed to your personal growth and opportunities? Thank you.
Yeah, this was actually something I wanted to ask you both about, and I completely forgot because we got taken up by other things. But you both chose to do masters overseas, and neither of you did it immediately after your law degrees. So, just building on this question, like, how did you know it was the right time? How did you choose where to do it? And did it make a big difference to have done a master's in human rights? Lorata, I don't know if you want to start.
So in relation to kind of, it's just starting with Temba's question first, in relation to courses at law school, I don't necessarily think so. I think law school is supposed to be so foundational. Very rarely do people ever look at and be like, oh, this person really did this elective, not that elective. So the thing about law school is to do it and do it as well as you can. That's it. In relation to further studying, I highly recommend that people practice or do something for a year or two before you decide what courses to do. They have it here at the bar where people will be like, I want to do competition law, so they'll do a competition course. But sometimes that's not necessarily where they land up. And so what is often most helpful is starting and seeing yourself starting out doing a lot more health or so on, and then saying, actually, I need to enrich my experience because I'm doing that. So I would do it as a much more kind of reactive thing to how your practice is developing. And then lastly, in relation to your question, Seth, look, I mean, it helped, and I became a litigator, and I didn't do a lot of international human rights law for about 10 years. And then, I did. And having the masters has helped, to be in certain spaces, but it was not something that I immediately drew down on, you know. And now that I'm doing, kind of international human rights law, and now the law has moved on 10 years later, but I at least have some of the language and have that, in that space. But yeah, so look, I mean, I think it's important to do things that will open your mind, and doing a master's and whatever will open your mind and open things. And that's always important. But whether it translates kind of one for one to the work you do, that certainly wasn't my experience.
Yeah, you kind of reminded me of something funny, which is I think I was 3 or 6 months into my practice and I came to Lorato and I was like, I think I'm becoming a labor lawyer and I don't really want to be one. And Lorato was like, you know what you need to do? The next invoice you get paid, go buy yourself a labor law textbook. And I think there's something very important about steering into where life is going to take you. You can't, you may have an idea of what you want to do, but you need to be open to other things as well. And I will say, labor law experience is never wasted experience. Everybody seems to have a labor law crisis on their hands. So just to say, no experience is wasted. And sometimes it's good to steer into where the river is taking you as opposed to fight upstream. Ominyana, do you have anything to share about your master's experience?
Yeah, that's hilarious. And good advice. So yeah, I think along with my whole organics evolution story, I did things in the wrong order. But it turned out to be all right. And I completely agree with what Lerato said. That's really on point. And the kinds of courses that you do in undergrad or in your law degree, I think you should, also try to stretch yourself. So, take an economics 101, that will help you. Those are foundational courses to understand how the world works. You don't just get to do business law or corporate law, so doing those other kinds of courses that help you to understand the world that you plan to be in and impact on, I think is important. Taking a language can be that. Taking a course in the arts could be that. So I would say, do things that interest you, but also that stretch you in different ways. And I think on the master's thing, yes. Look, guys, everyone has a master's. you, you, that's who you're competing with. So, you are competing with people who have both international masters and masters from our excellent universities in South Africa. And you may go somewhere else. You may end up working in a different country in Africa or in Europe. So that UCT degree may look, interesting to other people, even though you feel like, oh, but it's a local degree, it's not a foreign degree. But I also want to say that, I've come to realize that we are still in a very unequal world. And as Africans, our qualifications are not seen as equal. No matter how the rankings are working, no matter how highly ranked our universities are, this is kind of the world of inequity that we live in. And you have to be prepared to live in that world and to fight the fights that you're going to fight against racism, against inequality. So do what you can. Apply to the universities, apply for scholarships, try and get contacts who can help you to do those applications, who have done it before. And a mentorship program certainly will have that kind of support. So tap into that. But at the end of the day, I've seen recruitment processes where they're like, oh, this person has a university from North America or from Canada, and that is the perception that it is more valuable. And, you then have to go and shine in different ways and go to an interview and be excellent, and grab those opportunities that come to you. But let's not lie, we're dealing with sexism every single day. As a Black woman in this space, it is hard. It is hard to be taken seriously for who you are and what your qualifications are You're constantly being asked to prove yourself. You walk into rooms and it's like, well, who's the most important person in the room? Not you. And it may be that you are. It may be that you are, leading a group or leading a team. And you have to be prepared to have those to be able to exist and navigate those spaces. And that's why I say, be your authentic self, and try and create an environment where other Black people, other Black women can see you and say, oh, I too can do this. And, we are creating spaces for other people. That's what we're doing. We're creating spaces. We are supporting other Black people, other Black women. I'm in the extremely fortunate position to have a Black woman who is the lead, the executive director of this UN agency that I work for. And I don't want her job. That job is hard. She has to fight every single day against racism. And she talks about it. She talks about racism and the colonialism that is in all of these institutions. She's very open about it. And so there's a conversation that's happening about decolonizing global health, public health, decolonizing all these different spaces. But this discussion we have to take it up. We have to engage with this discussion because it has an impact on our lives, our trajectories. But all of us have to be willing to do the work. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality, but I think it is important for all of us to be aware of it. I'm going to give one last opportunity for questions before I release two very busy and, as you now know, incredible women who I have had the privilege to have in my life in various ways and now have been a part of your life very briefly. I'm just looking, this is like your last chance. If you want to ask a question, put your hand up right now. Okay. Well, Temba is yet again asking a question. Okay, we'll take one last question from Temba and then we'll close it out. Temba, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, I had way more questions, but they have been answered. Thank you for that. One more question that I think I can ask is that what just hold on, what other challenges have might I face if I want to study abroad and have maybe my LLM from England or London? What challenges might I face when integrating a foreign degree into my career, and how can I overcome that? Thank you.
So just invite both of you to just make like a closing remark as well, so you can deal with that question and also just make some general closing statements, and then I'll release both of you. Umanyana, do you want to go first?
Okay, so I think I said a lot in the last answer about studying and master's degrees. But I think when you do study abroad, which I did, I think one of the things is about culture and encountering other people's cultures and just being open to learning about what other people's struggles are, right? Because you sometimes think that you're from Africa, you're the Black person, you're the single Black person in the room, and therefore your story must be the hardest, the biggest struggle. And you might find that that's not true. You might find, there are others who have had other struggles that you should try to engage with and learn from, and be in solidarity with other people. But if you do have that opportunity, it's a fantastic one. So do take it. And then maybe just to finish, just I've said a lot about what I think about leadership, and what my leadership journey has been. And I would just say that in some, in some ways, this journey, as we've been saying, is organic. But centering yourself around the values that are important to you will do you well in your own leadership journey. And all of us are leaders, right? Every one of us have the ability to be leaders, are leaders. And so you should step into that leadership in the spaces that you are. And as I said before, making space for others. And we sometimes hear about those people who get in the door and then close the door behind them to not let anyone else in. But I think the job of leadership is to get more people, get more African people, get more Black women into these spaces, because we add so much value, and we deserve to be in those spaces. And I think leadership as well is about supporting your leadership. So, like I said, it's also about giving, right? So it's about how you support your own leadership. I think very frequently about how I support my executive director, who is an African woman, and who is in a position of having to engage with other UN heads who don't look like her. And so making sure that we are successful is her success. And supporting her is our success. And it also then, it's not going to be the last Black woman leader, because you've shown that excellence throughout the organization and you're supporting each other. So for me, it's always about making that space. And I really hope that you all step into your journeys in law and in leadership and in healthcare, and offer and have many offerings, have the generosity that you're getting through programs like this, and offer it to others. Thanks, Sephora.
Thank you so much, Lerato.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just building on that. I think one of the things is knowing that you even now are in a position to also be somebody else's mentor. Because being in law school, you're one step ahead of the person who's in high school, who's trying to do what you can do. And being in articles, you're one step ahead of the person who's in law school. So, rivers that don't flow die, as my, is that you can be a recipient for people, but you must also flow. You must also give back. You must also be, and in that you will learn, and so that I think one of the things that's been very important to me is, yes, looking forward to the people that can help me grow, but also knowing at every moment that I'm in a position to help somebody else's grow, right? So I mean, that's why I would impress upon you guys, and then just in yeah, in relation to Tim's question, I mean, I don't think there's too much challenge kind of integrating, but also just if you want to study overseas, I think one of the things that it can sound like this strange and very far away thing, particularly if you have come from, you study because of NSFAS, you don't have the monies and the funds. Just to know that many of us did this from kind of various scholarship programs that are here, and there's ways. So to the extent that kind of stuff can sound very far away, know that there's there's those things. They're not complete answers, but in the sense that, do you now have to go find thousands of dollars for a university? I think there's reasonable ways to get everybody overseas and to do all of that, and it's just to be able to look out for that kind of stuff.
I think that's very important, very practical advice there. So thank you so much, both of you, for making yourselves available. I cannot emphasize to our mentees how incredible an opportunity this was to get both of these women here for an hour and a half of their time. And I think you both just shared such incredible insights. I felt like I learned so much from both of you as well. So I really cannot thank you enough for making yourselves available on a Saturday morning. I know you both have a lot of family commitments and other commitments. So really appreciate your generosity in taking the time to speak to everybody here. And really, that's all I can say. Not really enough, but just to say thank you so much. And please have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Yes.
No, thank you very much. All right. Okay. Cheers, guys.
Hey. I was trying to open up the agenda to see if there are any other matters that need to be discussed today. Unfortunately, I'm having a problem opening it, and Elizabeth is at a doctor's appointment. Can I just invite any of you in the next 5 minutes? Are there any things that you want to discuss or raise that I can refer or relay back to Elizabeth? Is everybody doing okay? Enjoying mentorship program? Okay, I'm going to take it as nobody has any problems or concerns that they want to raise. Thanks very much again for joining today. I hope you all found it to be a useful and enriching session. And I believe there's going to be a session on the 22nd of this month about pupillage. If you have any questions about that or would like any specific topics raised, please just let Elizabeth or myself know. Otherwise, have a great rest of your weekend and see you guys next month. Bye.